Okay, in this video we're going to cover Egypt. It should be a shorter video, hopefully. Fingers crossed. All right, so Egypt. A little backstory here: the Mamluks. The Mamluks had originally risen in power. These are people who had fought off the Mongols when the Mongols were pushing into the Middle Eastern regions. So the Mamluks had risen to power in Egypt and were basically a vassal state of the Ottomans. They were technically under Ottoman control. However, the Mamluks basically were in control of Egypt. They were very skilled horseback warriors for most of history, and they were a devastating military force, kind of got to do their own things, totally humiliated by Napoleon. Napoleon using modern military, I mean, in fairness, Napoleon also humiliated a lot of Europe too, but Napoleon using modern military technology and modern weaponry and tactics and everything, Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon moves into Egypt and conquers it pretty easily and uses that as his big launch pad, his claim to fame. And we mentioned this before. You may have heard that Napoleon's soldiers used cannons to blow off the nose of the Sphinx. There's no historical evidence of that. That's just urban legend, myth. He did find the Rosetta Stone while he was in Egypt. That, not him personally, but his soldiers did. So, anyways, Napoleon invades Egypt. That was a big wake-up call for Egypt because they get massively humiliated. So post-Napoleon, remember, a lot of Europe goes back to how it was. They redraw the maps, the Congress of Vienna and all that. So Egypt's going to go about the same. Post-Napoleon, a young military officer named Muhammad Ali rises to power. Not this Muhammad Ali. This Muhammad Ali. This one, this Muhammad Ali is a little older, obviously, a little more recent, a little later in history. This one is the one we're talking about here. So, post-Napoleon, the young officer, Muhammad Ali, rises to power, and he's like, well, that sucked. Let's not let this happen again. So, instead of having another, Napoleon possibly invade, he's going to modernize the army, bring in a lot of European-style weaponry, European tactics, and try to modernize the country. He's going to start conquering into what's now today Syria, and he starts to expand, and it looks like Egypt's rising up. Yay, he's trying to modernize the economy. However, European resistance. The Europeans don't want a powerful Egypt. They want to control Egypt, and there's one important reason why, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, Egypt, the same problem the Ottomans were having, the same problem a lot of places are having. They're relying on imports because they're not going to develop their own industry, and because they don't probably really have the resources to develop their own industrial revolution. They're relying on imports. So all of these nice clothes that Muhammad Ali probably were made in European factories, probably English factories specifically. And so it's going to be harder for them to make their own economy, and they're constantly sending money away to Europe to get goods in return. All right. So European involvement in Egypt. Egypt's main economy at this time period is, and you've probably heard of this before, is cheap cotton. Egyptian cotton was being traded to Europe for goods. Meanwhile, loans and debt are increasing as Egypt is increasingly going broke. So they're becoming more indebted to the Europeans, and the Europeans love to give them loans because they realize that giving them loans, think about this: if you get a house from the bank and you stop paying your mortgage, what does the bank do? Well, it takes your house. Well, the Europeans know that they can do basically the same thing with Egypt. If they, especially like England and France, realize that if Egypt continually goes broke and to the Europeans, then they will be justified. They will have a casus belli, a reason for war. They will have a reason to go to war with Egypt to take it outright. What's the big prize? Why do they want to even pick on poor Egypt? They don't care about the pyramids or anything. Now the care is the Suez Canal. All right, so the Suez Canal basically is a link here between between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. All right, now, problem. There's land there. Not a lot, but there is land in between here. This is seen from modern-day satellite images. But the problem was there was no natural canal. Okay, they wanted to be able to go from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, but they didn't have it there. And they knew that it could be built. Just like, the Panama Canal is being built in Panama. That's actually later. The Suez Canal comes first. But they realized that they could build this canal here. And whoever can control that canal will essentially control European access to Asia. If you can build the Suez Canal, it will cut the trip in half. You no longer have to go all the way around Africa to get to India, or all the way around Africa to get to the Southeast Asia or China. This will cut the time in half. And so the Suez Canal is incredibly important. That's the big prize. So the Europeans want that. And so they realize that if Egypt is super weak, they eventually could probably get it. A French company, joint stock company, wins basically a contract with Egypt, and they agree to build the Suez Canal. And they build it, at least originally, saying like, hey, Egypt, we're going to build this together. We're going to profit, and you're going to profit. We're going to give you shares in the company, and you're going to own part of the Suez Canal as well too. So it will be for Egypt, and it will also be for France. It'll be for this French company. They used forced Arab labor. The Suez Canal is a famous painting about the creation of the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was largely hand dug. While there are machines and things coming out of the Industrial Revolution, they weren't being sent to Egypt. In Egypt, it was viewed as having cheap human, basically close to slave labor, oftentimes conscripted labor, used to dig out the canal. So yeah, pretty rough stuff. Probably thousands of people died working in the hot sun, moving, oftentimes by hand, these baskets of dirt as they're moving. And this is how the Suez Canal was created. And the Suez Canal is pretty big. We'll look at some other pictures here in a minute. So they dig out the canal here using forced Arab labor. French company is going to benefit originally. They also say the Egyptian country is going to benefit. However, the Egyptian Sultan, going broke, they're in debt, they're in massive debt to the Europeans, sells their stocks to England to pay off their debts, to help pay off the debt. Okay, so now the canal is not owned by Egypt at all, right? It's in Egypt, it's in their territory. However, the ownership of the canal part here is moving entirely to Europeans. Egypt's continually spiraling, eventually civil unrest. They're going to have riots, and they're having people who are calling for political change. And so there's riots breaking out in the streets. And British forces move in. British forces move in because they are trying to defend British business interests. By the way, America conquers Hawaii in almost the exact same way. But British troops move in, and they say they're doing it for Egypt's own good. They have to, put down the revolt and put down the unrest. Egypt obviously can't take care of itself, and so they need England's help. And so England, who already owns stocks in the canal, basically just takes the canal over. They take over Egypt as well too. They're not going to outright own Egypt and add it as part of the British Empire. So there is still an Egyptian government. However, the British was there as advisors, who also had troops. Okay, think about this. If China had troops in Sylvania or Toledo, Ohio, and they were, marching up and down the streets and stuff, but we still had our government, right? Obviously we're still in control. There's just Chinese military everywhere. You would probably begin to figure out what was going on. Obviously China had conquered us, and they were just making a puppet government. Well, that's exactly what England did in Egypt. They made basically a puppet government. Why did they do this? Why did they care? They wanted the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is still to this day a very important thing. And England, who's conquering India, and England, who's trying to conquer China, and England, who's trying to conquer the entire world, realizes the importance of the Suez Canal. Even into the 20th century, where the British Empire was starting to fall apart, this is where they dug in their heels during World War II. This is where they said no to the Germans. The Germans and Italians had taken North Africa and were pushing this way, and they get right up into Egypt, and that's where the British basically throw everything they have and say we can't lose the Suez Canal, because to lose the Suez Canal would cut Britain off from the rest of their empire. And so this is where they dig in. Suez Canal is incredibly important, still is to this day. Here's some modern day pictures. Suez Canal, these are container ships. So containers, these giant containers, which then can be moved to trains or trucks. You've probably seen these on the back of flatbed trucks before. These containers are how things come from China or anywhere else around the world, and they're shipped around the world. So container ships are incredibly important, and these ships are massive, by the way, just to give you an idea. And yes, this is a aircraft carrier. The Suez Canal is so big that aircraft carriers can move through it. The Panama Canal is designed that way too. Aircraft carriers are designed more for the Panama Canal, if that makes sense. But yeah, and that's probably, I don't know, like a destroyer of some sort, maybe. So the Panama Canal is monstrous. It is a huge, Suez Canal is monstrous. It's a huge canal, and it was built largely for economic reasons, for making profit, and also for domination reasons, for military control of different regions of the world. England is going to own it, essentially, and so they fought for it, and they won it over, and it's an incredibly crucial part of their empire. Canals were pretty much built for imperial reasons. The Panama Canal was built for America to be able to be more involved with Asia. The Suez Canal is largely built by the French and then taken over by the English in order to be controlled for the British Empire. So incredibly important stuff. Political cartoon here. I like this one just because of, I feel like they made a lost opportunity here. But you see all these different animals that represent different countries: the Russian bear, the British lion. Spain, I guess, is a donkey. In Germany and Austria, but then you see here's this fox is Turkey. Why didn't they make Turkey a turkey? I don't know. But he's standing on top of Egypt. The lions just share. England has taken over, defeated Egypt, and conquered Egypt like the and it looks like a Nile crocodile. So, and that's how Egypt will become largely under the domination of England, especially the Suez Canal. It's all about the Suez Canal. And that's where we'll stop this video.